Jack Thompson was 74 years old, a man who blended so easily into the rhythms of Seabrook, Maine, that most people hardly noticed him until he was gone from sight. His cottage stood on a rise above the harbor, a modest white house with peeling paint, a rocking chair on the porch, and an American flag that flew day and night, rain or shine. Every morning before the sun broke the horizon, Jack followed the same routine he had kept for decades. Coffee poured into a dented thermos, bait bucket ready, his cap tugged low against the salty wind. His knees complained on the walk down the gravel path, but his stride was steady, practiced, born of years at sea. Jack had once been a Navy machinist's mate during the Korean War, though he rarely spoke of it. The discipline, the early mornings, and the quiet pride had never left him. To the townsfolk, he was simply Old Jack, a fisherman with a weathered face and calloused hands, as much a fixture of the harbor as the lighthouse or the gulls circling overhead. Yet behind that ordinary presence was a man who carried a lifetime of stories he seldom told, a man whose world still began and ended with the tide. The docks were quiet in the early light, the air carrying the mix of salt, diesel, and damp wood that belonged only to a working harbor. Jack's boat, the Sea Belle, waited at the far end, her paint chipped but her frame solid, every inch built by his own hands in the restless years after the war. As he made his way past the bait shack, Jack noticed a boy crouched awkwardly on the planks, his small fingers tugging at a stubborn knot in a fishing line. The boy was Charlie Watson, 10 years old, his father a lobsterman who often left before dawn. Charlie's face was flushed with frustration, his lips pressed tight as the knot only tightened under his pull. Jack paused, setting down his thermos and crouched beside him. "Morning, Charlie," he said, his voice gravelly but kind. "Looks like that knot's giving you trouble." The boy looked up, embarrassed. "Yeah, Mr. Jack. I can't get it loose." Jack's weathered hands moved with the ease of long practice, looping the line just so, guiding it free with a small tug. "See here, patience is the trick. The sea teaches you slow if you let it." Charlie's eyes lit up as the knot slipped free, his shoulders relaxing with relief. "Thanks, Mr. Jack." Jack gave a small nod and picked up his thermos, the faintest smile tugging at his mouth. He didn't need many words. For him, small gestures and quiet help were enough, and the boy's grin was worth more than thanks. The calm of the morning broke with a low, pulsing rumble that vibrated through the planks under Jack's boots. He turned, frowning, just as the starlight came slicing around the bend, its white hull gleaming in the sun like polished bone. Music thundered from the deck, a pounding beat more at home in Miami than Seabrook, and on the upper level a cluster of young men and women laughed, glasses of champagne raised high. At the wheel stood Ryan Carter, the tech billionaire who had bought up the grandest stretch of beachfront, a man locals muttered about but never challenged. The yacht cut through the harbor as if it owned the water, throwing up waves that made smaller boats pitch and sway. Jack lifted both arms, waving, his voice straining against the roar. "Hey, watch your course." The words vanished into the music. He turned the Sea Belle's wheel hard, but the old motor coughed, sputtered, and fell silent. A heartbeat later came the crack of impact, steel striking wood with merciless force. Jack was hurled against the dock, pain lancing through his knees as the Sea Belle splintered beneath him. He scrambled to the edge, eyes locked on the stern as the flag he had flown for 40 years tore free and tumbled into the churning wake. Above him, a voice called out, careless and amused. "It's just an old boat, man." The laughter carried, sharp as broken glass. Jack hauled himself upright, breath ragged, and leaned over the dock to snatch the sodden fabric from the water. He pressed it against his chest, his hands shaking but steady enough to hold fast. Around him, joggers slowed, tourists raised their phones, fishermen stared, but no one stepped forward. Only Jack and the flag remained, a man and a symbol clinging to each other in the echo of ruin. By evening, the harbor's quiet had shifted into something harsher. Michael, Jack's grandson, burst into the cottage with his phone in hand, his face tight with anger. "It's everywhere, Grandpa," he said, shoving the screen forward. The video played in jerks, Jack waving his arms, the Sea Belle shattering, the flag pulled from the water. A title blared across the top, "Old Man Loses Boat to Yacht, LOL." Comments scrolled by, "Should have retired years ago. Who lets Grandpa near the water? Classic boomer wreck." Michael's voice rose. "They're laughing at you. We can't just let this go. We need to call a lawyer, the news, somebody." Jack stayed seated at the kitchen table, the damp flag spread carefully across the wood. His thumb traced the fabric as if memorizing each star. "It's just noise," he said quietly. "Let it pass," but Michael's jaw tightened. "This isn't right. He humiliated you. He destroyed your boat, and now the whole world's piling on." Jack rose slowly, walked to the porch, and stared at the empty slip below. 40 years of mornings gone in the snap of a careless laugh. The next day at the marina, the harbor master shifted uneasily as Jack approached. Insurance says the Sea Belle wasn't up to code, no radar reflectors, no nav lights. They're calling it a total loss. Jack nodded once, already expecting the words. Around him, townsfolk moved through their routines, but their glances lingered, pity from some, embarrassment from others, curiosity from those who only knew him through a screen. Nobody spoke, nobody stepped closer. In a town that had known him all his life, Jack felt more invisible than ever. That night the cottage was quiet except for the steady tick of the wall clock and the hum of the refrigerator. Jack sat at the kitchen table, the flag spread across the wood, its fabric still damp and smelling faintly of salt. His calloused hands moved gently over the stars, not polishing, not repairing, simply remembering. On the shelf above the table sat an old wooden chest, the kind issued to sailors decades ago. Jack reached up, drew it down, and opened the lid. Inside lay medals he had never shown, photographs of young faces frozen in time, and at the bottom, carefully folded, the flag from his Navy retirement. He stared at it for a long moment, his breath uneven, the weight of silence pressing harder than any storm. Finally, he reached for the logbook he had kept for 40 years, a record of tides, weather, and catches. The pen hovered, then scratched across the page. First day without the Sea Belle, feels wrong. He closed the book, slid it aside, and sat back in the chair. Outside, the harbor lights flickered, music still pulsing from the yacht across the water, laughter spilling faintly through the night. Jack leaned on his elbows, listening to the echo, the kind that seeps into the walls when a house is too empty. For decades, the boat had given him purpose, a reason to rise before dawn, a rhythm no one else needed to understand. Now the slip was bare, and the quiet he once cherished felt like a wound. The next morning dawned gray and heavy with fog, the kind that swallowed the harbor until sea and sky became one. Jack stood on his porch as always, coffee cooling in his hand, staring at the empty slip where the Sea Belle had once rested. He almost missed it at first, a low, rolling sound that didn't belong to lobster boats or gulls. Then came another, deeper, unmistakable, the foghorn of a Navy vessel. Shapes emerged from the mist, massive and steady, steel-gray hulls cutting silently into the harbor. One by one, 6 ships appeared in formation, flags flying at half-mast, their decks lined with sailors at attention. The town stirred in disbelief. Shopkeepers left their counters, tourists froze mid-step, fishermen pulled off their caps. Crowds swelled along the dock, hushed as if the whole town had stumbled into a memory larger than itself. On the lead destroyer stood Rear Admiral Karen Mitchell, her white uniform sharp against the gray, a folded flag cradled in her arms. As the ship eased close, her voice carried across the still water. "Chief Petty Officer Thompson," she called, "permission to come ashore and render honors." Jack's breath caught, his spine straightening as instinct rose from somewhere deep. He lifted a hand in a crisp salute. "Permission granted, Admiral." The gangway lowered, footsteps struck wood, and the Admiral approached flanked by a color guard. She stopped before Jack, presenting the folded flag with both hands. 50 years ago, you saved the lives of over 100 sailors aboard the USS Lincoln when a coolant line ruptured in a storm. You asked for no recognition, only that your brothers be remembered. Yesterday, your vessel was destroyed and no respect was shown. Today, the United States Navy has come to say you were never forgotten. A murmur swept through the crowd, heads bowing, phones lowering, silence deepening until only the lapping water remained. Jack accepted the flag, his hands trembling, his throat tight. Around him, the people of Seabrook saw not just an old fisherman, but the hero who had lived quietly in their midst all along. As the Admiral and her guard withdrew, the crowd remained hushed, still absorbing what they had just witnessed. Then movement stirred at the far end of the dock. Ryan Carter appeared, walking alone, no entourage, no music, no champagne glass in hand. The swagger that usually clung to him was gone, his shoulders slumped, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jeans. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers, some jeered under their breath, others crossed their arms, ready to chase him off. Michael stepped forward instinctively, but Jack raised a hand, steady and quiet, keeping his grandson back. Ryan stopped a few paces away, his voice low but clear. "Mr. Thompson, I came to apologize." The doc fell silent again. He swallowed hard, glancing at the flag clutched in Jack's arms. "I didn't know who you were, didn't know what that boat meant. I acted like a fool." He pulled an envelope from his jacket, holding it out awkwardly. "It's a blank check. Whatever number you think is fair, just say it." Jack looked at the envelope but made no move to take it. His reply was calm, almost gentle. "Money won't rebuild what was lost." Ryan's face tightened, searching. Then tell me what will. For a long moment, Jack said nothing. Then he nodded toward the point where an old bench sagged, its wood gray and splintered. That bench is rotting. Replace it. Put a plaque on it, 3 words. Remember the quiet. Confusion flickered across Ryan's face, but the weight in Jack's tone left no room for argument. Slowly, Ryan nodded. All right, I'll do it. The crowd, still wary, watched him turn and walk back down the dock alone, leaving behind only the faint sound of his footsteps and the uneasy sense that something had shifted. For a moment after Ryan's footsteps faded, no one moved. Then Jim, the harbor master, stepped forward, cap in hand. His voice was rough with regret. Jack, we'd like you to have a permanent slip at the marina, free of charge. For any boat you choose. Jack gave a small nod. Thank you, Jim. That was all, but it loosened something in the crowd. One by one, others came forward, the bakery owner with flour still on her apron, the clerk from the bait shop, old lobstermen from both ends of the harbor. They extended hands, offered small words, apologies, and promises of help. Jack accepted each gesture quietly, the same way he'd offered help over the years, without fanfare, steady and calm. On the edges of the dock, children clustered wide-eyed, whispering as if they were watching history instead of the same old man they'd passed every day. Finally, one boy edged closer, Charlie, the same child Jack had helped with the fishing line days before. Rope in hand, he held it out shyly. Mr. Jack, will you show me again? Jack's eyes softened as he crouched, guiding the boy's fingers through the loop. More children pressed in, curious, eager, until Jack was surrounded by small hands tugging at lines. Parents watched from a distance, their expressions shifting from surprise to something warmer: gratitude, respect, even pride. For the first time in a long while, the dock felt alive with the sound of voices not mocking or dismissing but leaning in, listening. Jack tied the knot tight, handed the rope back to Charlie, and saw in the boy's grin a spark of what Seabrook had nearly forgotten: the strength of quiet example. A week later, the whole town gathered at the marina, the air buzzing with anticipation. Local boat builders and veterans had worked side by side, and now the new Sea Belle, sleek, polished, with her flag already flying, was ready for launch. Families pressed along the dock, children craning their necks, reporters clustering with cameras. Jack stood back, humbled, watching the vessel ease toward the water. Then, just as the lines strained against the current, one of the mooring ropes snapped with a sharp crack. The boat lurched sideways, momentum carrying it toward the piling where a small group of children stood too close to the edge. Shouts rang out, parents grabbing for little arms, but one boy, Charlie, stumbled, slipping on the damp boards. Without hesitation, Jack moved, faster than his aching knees should have allowed. He caught the boy by the collar, hauling him upright as the crowd gasped. At the same time, he shouted directions, sharp and certain. Hold the bow steady. Ease her off, don't fight the current, use the tide. His voice cut through the chaos, the kind of command forged on storm-tossed decks decades earlier. Men scrambled to obey, pulling lines, guiding the vessel back under control. Within minutes, the danger passed. The new Sea Belle floated steady, her reflection calm in the harbor. The crowd erupted in applause, louder even than before, not just for the boat, but for the old sailor who had once again shown he was more than memory. Jack ruffled Charlie's hair, steadying the boy on his feet, and only then let his own breath out, slow and measured. When the commotion finally stilled, all eyes turned back to the vessel, now resting steady on the water. Sunlight broke through the thinning clouds, catching the polished wood and glinting off the brass fittings. The flag at her stern lifted proudly in the breeze, red, white, and blue vivid against the sky. The mayor stepped forward with a few words of formality, but the moment belonged to Jack. Michael took his grandfather's arm and guided him toward the edge of the dock, where a Navy officer stood at the helm of the new Sea Belle. The officer's grin was wide, his voice carrying across the hush. Permission to come aboard, Chief? Jack's throat tightened, his answer barely steady. Permission granted. The crowd erupted into cheers, caps raised, hands clapping, voices calling his name. Fishermen whistled from their boats, shopkeepers leaned out of doorways. Even the reporters lowered their cameras for a beat to clap along. Jack stepped carefully onto the deck, his hand brushing the rail as if greeting an old friend returned from far away. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the gentle roll of the hull beneath his feet remind him of every dawn he had ever faced at sea. When he opened them, Michael stood beside him, pride bright in his face. Jack laid a hand on his grandson's shoulder, then on the flag at the stern, his expression both solemn and soft. In that instant, the town understood. The Sea Belle was more than just wood and sail. She was memory, dignity, and the unbroken thread of a life lived in quiet service. 11 As the cheers swelled and the new Sea Belle rocked gently at her mooring, a small shape broke from the crowd at the dock. Charlie, the boy Jack had helped with the fishing knot, stood stiffly with his feet together, his small hand lifted in a salute far too big for him. For a moment the dock went quiet again, as if every voice knew better than to interrupt. Jack caught the gesture and felt his chest tighten. Slowly he straightened, lifted his own hand to his brow, and returned the salute with the crisp precision of a sailor who had never forgotten. The crowd erupted once more, but Jack's eyes stayed on the boy, a faint smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. In Charlie's bright gaze, he saw not only gratitude, but the promise that some lessons would carry on, that patience, respect, and quiet strength still mattered. The town had given him back his boat, but in that salute he found something deeper, proof that what he had lived for had not been lost to time. As the sun dipped low over Seabrook, painting the water gold, Jack stood tall on the deck of the Sea Belle, his hand lowering slowly from the salute, the boy's grin shining back at him. It was a small moment, almost nothing at all, yet it was everything, a bridge between generations, a reminder that even the quietest life could echo long after the tide rolled out. Jack's story is more than a tale about a boat. It's about dignity, respect, and the quiet strength that can outlast time. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to give this video a like, share it with someone who believes in the power of quiet heroes, and subscribe to our channel for more true stories that honor everyday courage. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Who in your life has lived with that same quiet strength? Your stories keep this community alive.